Welcome to Under the Microscope. I am your host, Jenny Germano. Thank you, everyone, for joining me today. Today's topic is going to be 5 compliance challenges that can make or break your regulated cannabis business. Before I jump in, I just want to give a brief description of my background. I started working in the cannabis industry in 2009 in Colorado, running and operating vertically integrated cannabis operations. And in 2015, I founded my company, ICS Consulting, and I have been helping operators navigate the regulatory landscape across the United States for the last 10 years. Let's dive into today's topic. One of the things I was thinking about, and somebody might be thinking, Jenny, how come you always want to talk about how challenging the cannabis industry is? And a lot of my episodes, I focus on the challenges or the common pitfalls or the struggles that people are up against. And the reason behind that is I work with a lot of operators. Not only have I been on the front line working these facilities and running them and working with employees. And I now help operators do the same thing in their businesses for the last 10 years. And a lot of the feedback that I'm getting for operators is they wish that they had a platform or there was some kind of context out there that would have helped them navigate all the challenges. They didn't know all the challenges that they were going to be up against. They didn't know all the ups and downs or the curveballs, and they didn't really find out until they either jumped into that licensing phase or getting operational. And that's really the whole premise of my podcast is to really provide the reality for anyone who's looking to start a business in this industry or an existing operator and then having on experts or myself and existing operators coming on here and sharing their stories can provide that information for somebody in a new emerging market. And so that's why I'm always talking about the challenges and I try to weave it in with some compliance because at the end of the day, the challenges, it's the true reality of the cannabis industry. And I don't want to ever leave that out. And I want to make sure people are as prepared and committed to this journey that they're going to be embarking on, which we call the cannabis industry. Great questions. I love when people leave questions. So I appreciate all those who comments on my YouTube channel or sent me questions. It's really helpful for me. Like I said, it's important to understand the reality of this business that you're stepping into. And I think a lot of times people come from other industries and they're hoping that experience, whether it's restaurants or oil and gas or working in healthcare or just owning a business, that bringing those skills over will help you. And of course, they're going to help you. However, regulated cannabis is a whole other animal. And I know we have lots of other regulated industries out there, but our industry is still very new. And we have things, for example, it's federally illegal. However, we're building this industry while it's still federally illegal and we're building it at the state level. A lot of people still don't have access to funding and the tax situation. So I'm going to dive into all that today and I'm going to go over these challenges. The first place I want to start is why is running a regulated cannabis so challenging? And I listed out a couple things. So there are traditional business operation functions that you will be doing in your regulated cannabis operation. That is 100% true. And all those skill sets that you bring over from other industries are going to work great in that arena. However, I would like to add on another layer, the regulated cannabis layer. So, why do operators tend to hit this wall or get stuck on this kind of hamster wheel in their business? Well, number one, the curveballs and challenges in the cannabis industry are nonstop, and it's not going to change here anytime soon. I think the industry is going to continue to not be stable until we know what's going on federally. At the end of the day, I think a good chunk of the industry and operators want it to be federally legal. It is a mixed bag out there. This episode is not going to be about that topic, but it is one of the layers of challenges. And here's why: because of taxes and banking. Banking can still be a challenge getting access. People can have access to bank accounts, but they're still struggling with getting capital, funding, raising money like a normal business would raise money. I would also say some other reasons that cannabis operators hit this wall is that the rules can change midstream. We've seen this happen all across the country. For example, what happened in New York with the 500 distant rule and how we had operators already legally operating for the last couple years, or some of them were still in the build out process. I can't remember the exact number of operators that's affected in New York, but essentially they could have to move their business after already being approved and these measurements being taken time after time. So this is a prime of example of how the rules of the game can get changed right in the middle on an operator. And to me, that is an extreme challenge. What they're facing in New York is an extreme challenge those operators are up against currently. Another example is overwhelm. I think sometimes because there's so much going on, there's a million directions operators getting pulled in. And not only are they trying to work in the business, but they're trying to work on the business. And they're putting out all these fires in the business. And they keep getting pulled away from the part where they're supposed to be working on their business and building it and expanding it. And because of this overwhelm, they can't manage all the tasks and what everyone's doing, and they can't keep up. It's easy to shut down. And what happens is the foundation begins to crack and things start to get exposed in the business. The weaknesses in places, even with compliance, it really can affect compliance in a cannabis operation. And when all this stuff starts happening up top, it trickles down and it starts affecting the employees. It starts affecting processes and how things are getting executed. I've seen it time and time again, not only as somebody who helps operators navigate this, but when I was working in facilities, the owner's completely overwhelmed. And this is such a high risk business, especially if you own a dispensary. A dispensary is the most high risk business out of all the licenses because of all the product, all the on hand cash, and they become more of a target than, let's say, a cultivator or a manufacturer or a testing lab. And then what happens is ownership or owners begin to white knuckle their way through everything, hoping that this whole thing doesn't blow up in your face and you're just trying to do the best you can. And I would like to point out that a multi state operator, an MSO is what we call them, somebody who's got multiple licenses in multiple states, their set of issues and challenges and overwhelm are completely different than, let's just say, a middle, medium to small size operator. And I'm really talking to the medium to small mom and pops, medium sized operators. Once we start getting up there and huge amount of licenses in other states, it's a whole set of new issues. It's a whole other ball game for MSOs, and maybe it might be a topic I talk about in the future. So I want to dive my list of 5 that I worked on. So the top 5 compliance challenges that operators face, and if you haven't started yet, these could be challenges that you will face. If you're in the middle of opening your facility, you might not have experienced all these yet, but these challenges can come either at the beginning or the middle, and it can be nonstop. Like I said, this industry is the up and down, the peaks and valleys that operators are going to be facing. It's up and down the entire time, and that is never going to go away. And what I try to help operators with is getting all these processes in place and making sure you have the right systems and structure. And then what happens when you have all these things in place, it can help you with all these challenges that I'm going to be talking about. And you can't make the challenges go away. There's no way to control the challenges, but you can control how you're going to react to the curveballs. And by having all the systems in place and structure and all the things that I'm always recommending that operators do, it's going to help teach you how to navigate these ups and downs and become less reactionary and build the skill set to adapt, become proactive and less reactive. That's the goal is you really should be proactive, and that's gonna help you manage overwhelm, all these curveballs I'm always talking about, the things that you didn't see coming around the corner. That's why it's really important to map out how you're gonna manage the business in with all the processes and systems. The top 5 cannabis compliance challenges operators will face. Number 1, inconsistent testing standards. I'm just going to read this list off and then I'll go back into them in detail. Number 2, a complex and often confusing regulatory maze. Number 3, inventory tracking and the risk of inversion. And number 4 is security, packaging, and product safety. And number 5 is financial, tax, and banking. Let's start with inconsistent testing records. I would like to first say that I am not an expert when it comes to running a testing facility, but I am here to talk about the challenges from the operation side. So the risks are huge when it comes to testing for operators. Operators, they're faced with potential recalls, failed testing results, and also losing consumer trust, public safety when these recalls get announced. They hit the press, they're in news articles, or maybe the health department, depending on who's in charge of recalls in your state. They're sending out mass emails, and now your company has been exposed as having a recall for their product. And recalls affect everyone. It affects the person who grew the product, the cultivation. It affects the person who then bought that product from the cultivation to create their product. They manufactured that product and it became something else, whether it's a drink or an edible, or they created pre-rolls from it and then they packaged it and sold it to the dispensary. And then that dispensary then sells it to the consumer. The recall affects 3 licensed operators, and it just really depends. I'm not gonna get into semantics of some people are vertically integrated, some people grow their own cannabis. Depending on the state rules and regulations, certain licenses can do this or that or can't do this or that. Try to stick with me here the best that you can. This is more of a broad discussion. So yeah, those 3 facilities are affected, but it can really affect a dispensary. Testing regulations can be very complex. Not all states are created equal, and that is the truth when it comes to cannabis regulations. It is completely different across the board. You could go to one state where maybe the testing regulations, I've seen it to where it was maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs and they had 30 pages of regulations. I've seen it where maybe it was 2 or 3 pages of their regulations. I think in Colorado, the last I counted, I thought we were around 47, 48. That could be going up here with the new rulemaking happening in Colorado. But 47 pages of testing regulations. And so it just depends what state you're in. They're all different. Everybody testing regulations, and I'm just gonna use this for an example. So one state might say, "Oh, we're a new emerging market. I'm gonna go through and look at Colorado's testing, and we're gonna go through and look at what's going on in Washington, and then we're gonna look through what's going on in Massachusetts, and I'm gonna pull this out of Massachusetts and this out of Washington, and then this section out of Colorado, and we're gonna cram it all together in our testing program for our new state in this new emerging market." I'm not sure what regulatory bodies are doing the research. I don't know if it's like in Colorado, where we have somebody that's part of our regulatory body that does have a science background, to support and help the regulators with our testing program. We have work groups. They're working all year long on different topics that they're covering. And there's also legislation implementation. And then they have a rulemaking session, which always begins in August here in Colorado. And then by the time January gets here, we have a new set of regulations or updates that we're implementing. But not all states have that process. And in some states, they're still trying to figure it out and they're still learning and growing, but it's not the same across the board. And this is where the risk is for operators because they could have a ton of money tied up in product and it could be on an administrative hold because of a recall, and then that product could have to be destroyed. And then what happens next? Is that manufacturer, depending on whose fault it is for the recall, if it's the lab's fault, if it's the manufacturer's fault, if it's the cultivator's fault, does that dispensary get money back? What if it was $100,000 in product? Where does that dispensary get that $100,000 from? If all that product has to get destroyed, that could put somebody out of business. And in fact, I think it has put people out of business, and I'll share why. One example that I want to talk about, the inconsistencies around testing can be challenging compliance wise and affect operators because recently a regulatory agency has revoked a license of a testing facility in the Midwest. This recall, I believe, came out in 2021. It was 64,000 pounds of cannabis flower. And the amount of money, that 64,000 pounds of cannabis flower that was recalled, was a total of $292 million in the cannabis industry. That recall affected 400 dispensaries. That's why I'm talking about this today. 400 dispensaries. In the announcement, they even mentioned that operators actually went out of business due to this recall. I can't even imagine the loss that maybe dispensaries went through. And this recall was because of something that happened at the lab. There were some inconsistencies, and no matter what kind of license that you're in, obviously dispensaries were the most affected because this product was already on the shelf and it affected 400 dispensaries. And this was through the laboratory, and they actually had their license revoked. And it's not always because of the laboratory. Sometimes people are using banned pesticides. Sometimes products pass initially and then they get created and then it goes on the shelf, and but there's some kind of breakdown along the way, or people are cheating the system, or there's inversion. There's so many different ways and reasons why these recalls happen and why there's so much inconsistency. So I just wanted to bring that up around the inconsistent testing standards and why that is such a compliance challenge for operators. Not obviously not only dispensaries, this does affect a cultivation facility and manufacturing as well. And there's such a high risk because if your product causes a recall, how are you going to handle that? How are you going to work with the dispensaries? Are you going to give everyone their money back? What's your process for that? So that's something that you should be thinking about. The next one is number 2, which is the regulatory maze and zoning. And this is of the 5 challenges that can make or break your regulated cannabis business. Even when you're compliant at the state level, local governments often create their own barriers, which is the example I gave about what's going down in New York. We've seen towns where they move the goalposts, they change the rules in the middle of the game, and with new zoning restrictions and outright bans, the risks are very costly for an operator. You can spend months and hundreds and thousands of dollars building at a site only to be blocked by a zoning change. And I'm sure if I was in a room full of a bunch of operators and I said, everybody raise your hand who this affect, we'd probably have half the room would raise their hand that they've had these zoning challenges and just navigating this regulatory maze. A best practice that I would recommend for this to assign a compliance officer whether in-house or through a consultant who's dedicated to tracking these changes in your market. You can also use compliance software to keep track the shifting requirements. And it's really important to document everything, especially when you're working with a zoning board. A strong paper trail can really protect you and your license. Another piece, you should really have somebody on your team that understands how to navigate through all the regulatory jargon. It's hard for people to understand how to read regulations and rules. And you have to have somebody that has the capability and the mindset that they can go in and absorb all that information and be able to translate it to the team and help you navigate. And if you don't have anybody on your team, it's also good to have a third party consultant or a fractional compliance officer work with your company to help navigate in the beginning and get you trained. And so you're a well oiled machine. But a lot of these big companies out there, like MSOs, they have big teams. They have in house counsel, they have people that do policy that are on their team that are out there lobbying on their behalf, helping create policy that benefits their company. And so they're out there doing that fight. Sometimes these smaller companies, they can't afford a lobbyist. They can't afford to have an in-house attorney. And so they have to get creative in how they're going to help themselves and support themselves with navigating this maze. And that's where working with a consultant or having somebody in a fractional role with your company can be another way to do that. So, number 3 of the top 5 compliance challenges that operators face. This can make or break your business, folks. Inventory tracking and inversion risk. Once again, we are in a high risk industry working in the regulated cannabis industry. Everyone's going to have to engage in some type of seed sale depending on what your state has implemented. Some states have their own seed to sale that they've created that they use. And then other states use already seed to sale tracking programs out there. For example, Metric or BioTrack, and states adopt to use as their mandated seed to sale tracking system. So we all know that you're going to have to use that. But here's the tricky part. This is where it can get a little sticky. So most of the risk comes from human error. And if anybody has ever been on Metric, and as somebody who goes into people's Metric accounts and we audit people's Metric accounts and we clean them up, I can tell you that without a doubt, 100% of what we find in the system is all human error through data entry and somebody not being properly trained or misunderstanding. And that is really why Metric can sometimes be a total mess for people. And it really comes down to making sure people are properly trained on the system. And sometimes people use these seed to sell tracking systems blindly. I also believe that the training that these platforms offer is really not in depth training. They've come a long way from where it was. The first time I learned Metric was in 2013 when they were launching in Colorado. The test pilot for Metric was in Colorado. It has really come a long way to where it is in 2025. I think it's a lot easier to use than it was all those years ago. But I think at the end of the day, most people that take the on-demand videos in their educational training portal still come out not fully understanding the system and how it works. And I think sometimes you're going in there with one eye open and one eye closed going, gosh, I really hope I'm doing this the right way and I'm not making any mistakes. But for some people, they get it. It's really easy, or they hire somebody that has experience on the team as their inventory manager. But sometimes when you're in these new states, you don't always have access to hiring someone from Colorado if you're in Minnesota because you're trying to hire somebody who lives in Minnesota to work at your facility. So it definitely is challenging. Also, there's the issue of internal theft, intentional misreporting, and inversion. And I'll give this tip right now for every operator who's listening to me or anyone who's thinking about getting into this market and getting a license. And I tell everybody this that I work with, as an owner, you have to know every inch of your business. You need to learn metric. As the owner of your dispensary, of your cultivation facility, I don't care if you don't know how to grow. I don't care if you've never run and operated a dispensary before and you've never worked in a manufacturing and you have this amazing team and they're going to do all the stuff for you. No way. You have to go in and you need to work in your business on the ground floor, and you should work every position. You should budtend. How does the money work? How does the cash work? How do I get the product out of the vault? How do I enter product in the POS system? How do I report sales and reconcile my inventory? How do I do physical inventory? How do I check an ID? How do I ring somebody in on the POS system? How do I talk about the product in my business? That's just like 2% of what you have to do. You have to know how every single piece works. I'm telling you, it will save your business from heartache, from issues, and you can keep your finger on the pulse. I have a client who's been really wonderful at this. He's learning every single thing and he's staying on top of it and he's learning every moving piece. He'd much rather be on a golf course right now and let somebody else run his dispensary, but he knew he couldn't do it. He knew it was a mistake. He knew he had to learn every single thing about the business, and he probably works the most hours. He works 12 hours a day, where he works more than anyone else in his business, and he's learning every single thing in his business these last 3 months. And it's the smartest thing that he could ever do for his business, because when he finally steps away, he can log into Metric and go, hey, that doesn't look right, because he knows how Metric works. He can log into the POS system and go, hey, that doesn't look right, and he can problem solve and figure it out. If the money's off, if something's going on with the cash or the inventory, he knows he can easily look at it and figure it out because he's worked those positions. He knows it by the back of his hand. And in this regulated industry, every owner should know this business by the back of your hand. If not, internal theft, inversion, diversion, intentional misreporting in the seed to sale tracking system. How do you know that your staff isn't doing that if you have no idea how those systems work? If you do not understand the POS, if you do not understand the seed to sale tracking system or the metric tags, whether you're a grow, I know I'm hitting it a little heavy on the storefront, but even at the manufacturing, how do you, are they following your recipes? Are people following safety protocols? Are people washing their hands? Like, how do you know these things are getting done correctly? In the beginning, obviously, once you've been operating 6 months, 8 months, or a year, and it becomes this well-oiled machine, and you have worked all those positions, and you know how every inch of the business works, you can start to dial back, and you can keep working on the business. But when you first open, you're going to be working in the business, and it's going to be overwhelming, and you're going to be trying to work on the business at the same time. But don't just fully pull back 100% out of the gate. You just can't do it, because you'll never know if people are stealing from you or if they're trying to divert your product out the back door, or if there's any kind of inversion. And we know what inversion is. A lot of times, companies who are struggling in the market, they can get cheaper product from the illicit market, the non-regulated and non-tested market, and somehow it makes its way into the metric system because people cheat and they find loopholes and they find ways to deceive and do inversion. And we hear it all across the country, where all of a sudden product from Oklahoma mysteriously ends up in the metric system in Missouri or Michigan, or we have untagged products and trash bags in Michigan mysteriously in a regulated facility and it's not tracked. So this inversion is happening all across the country and more the mature market. So it's something to watch out for. And that's why you should know every single inch of your business. So once again, like I said, most of that risk comes the metric system, human error. And so you really want to combat that with training. And I have a tip here: train your staff thoroughly, and that is making sure they're taking all the educational training that platform offers for that seed to sale. You can also work with third party companies or consultants, or there's lots of online training. I think it's better just to take the metric training or whatever the seed to sale software is, the on demand training that they offer, and then also work with a third party consultant to come in and spend one on one time remotely going through the system, walking you through everything in training and going over all your SOPs. The main reason why things are happening not so good in these seed to sale tracking is because the mistakes come from improper data entries. Doing things like a weekly audit and comparing your physical products to what's logged in the system, and most importantly, creating clear SOPs on how to investigate discrepancies. So, as far as a dispensary, you should be doing physical inventory every day. And this might be off putting to some people. And a lot of people like to do it once a month, once a week. Here's the challenge: when you wait a month, you're going to have a month of issues that pile up. And then you have to spend way more time trying to figure out where all the issues were and how to clean it up. And then all of a sudden you could have 2, 3 months of issues that you're trying to clean up because you're not really doing physical inventory. Also, when you do it every week, let's say once a day every week, that's very challenging and hard for the staff, because if you're open from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. every day, you don't really want to be doing inventory while you're serving customers, because then the challenge becomes, how are you counting inventory correctly while you're selling inventory? And some people do it. It can be challenging because it's just not accurate enough. And so you should be doing it before you open or after you close. And what I like to do is to break it into categories. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, let's just say, and maybe Friday, Saturday, and Sunday you don't do inventory. Maybe you do it Monday through Thursday, and each day is a category. Monday's flour, Tuesday's concentrates, Wednesday is maybe edibles and drinks. Just depends how many SKUs you have. But that way you're doing it every day. And what does this help you with? You're going to know if somebody's stealing from you. Number 2, you're going to be able to address discrepancies and clean it up in your seed to sale tracking system right away and nip it in the butt, and it's not going to pile on. And number 3, it can help with ordering, and whoever the purchasing manager is will know that what they're running low on, what they need to order. So it helps with a lot of things. And it helps with understanding spending, and okay, it looks like we're blowing through gummies, this brand of gummies way more. We need to start ordering more. I think we should order 2 more cases a week on top of the 4 cases we're already ordering. There's so many positive benefits to doing a physical inventory. And then when we get into the cultivation facility, it's plants. I think everyone should have one of those RFID scanners that you go bloop, and you sit there and you go and you grow and you just scan down the aisles and stuff like that. Way easier than physically hand counting plants, especially obviously if you're a smaller operator and you have 300, 500 plants or 1,000, it can be a little easier for the micros to count. When you start getting into larger tiers, up to 20,000, 30, 50,000, you have to invest in one of those scanners. There's no way you're going to have people walking around, all that labor, that waste of labor hours on counting 20,000 plants. So there's lots of things that you can do to really help support your inventory control with scanners and counting physical inventory. And manufacturers, of course, it's really important. And the things about manufacturing is They have a mix of goods, meaning they have product in final form, so pretty much packaged in its final form, direct to consumer, ready to be delivered to the dispensary. And then we have the raw materials, so it could be oil, trim, bud, depending on what they're making. Those raw materials that are being converted over to a product, whether it's tinctures or concentrates or edibles or drinks or whatnot. So they have to keep track of that inventory as well. And so their inventory is more split versus raw materials and ready to go product. And manufacturing facilities should be doing inventory as well. Just a reminder, these can make or break your business because what happens with compliance, if we don't comply, we can risk getting a violation. Obviously, you heard what happened in that one Midwestern state where they had close to $300 million in product on hold and how it affected 400 dispensaries. Really can make or break your business. Number 4 on compliance challenges that operators face is security, packaging, and product safety. Now, everything from child-resistant packaging and labeling accuracy to camera placement inside your facility. You slip up here, this is where you can get really nailed in the butt from the regulators. And typically they will take action and there will be fines. This is where recalls happen or even having a license suspended. It's really important, one, to make sure you're following all the security requirements. It's really important to have a process for your security. Are you auditing your cameras? Are you making sure all your cameras are working? Is there obstruction? Remember, you want to check your cameras. What if your employees are stealing? Here's what an employee might do who's stealing. They could put obstruction in front of a camera. They can move a box. They can create a blind spot so you can't see what's going on and it won't be on video. There's lots of ways to get sneaky with video. So you should be auditing your cameras all the time, making sure there's no obstruction, making sure that they're working and they're getting all the views that are required. Another one is the packaging. You have to make sure that you have the right requirements for packaging. If you have child-resistant packaging requirements, depending on what state you are, and you have that opaque packaging, do you have a child-resistant certificate? What if the state comes in and audits and says, "How do I know this is real child-resistant packaging? How are you going to prove that to me?" Did you get a certificate from the packaging company? How do you know the packaging company is telling you the truth? How do you know they really have child-resistant packaging? Did you get a certificate from them so you could keep that on file in your compliance binders or however you guys are tracking your record keeping? Labeling accuracy. Do you have a checklist? If you're a dispensary, do you have an intake checklist? Are you checking everyone's labeling and packaging to make sure it's compliant? Because once you accept product into your retail dispensary or a medical center, whatever you call it in your state, you're responsible. You're responsible. You can't say, "Oh, they didn't do a good job with their packaging and labeling." They'll go after them and take care of them, but they're also going to take care of you because you accepted the product into your metric system. That's why with the seed to sales tracking, we'll talk about metric here because that's pretty much the one that's across the United States. There's a feature in metric where you can reject a package. I always tell people that I work with, "Hey, if it's not right, you can reject that package and you can send it back. If it's got improper labeling, don't accept the package. You should be auditing the label, the verbiage, the universal symbol, all the things that are required. You should have an intake checklist and making sure that you're accepting package, that you're accepting product in that is in compliance. If you're in a new state, I'm not going to mention what state, but if you're in, let's say, a new state where they're still working out their testing regulations, and so far they haven't developed a threshold for testing, but yet they say as long as it says, "Hey, this product has been tested in compliance with blah, blah, blah," and it's on the label, that's good enough. and you're going to take that product in, and then people are going to get sick when they take that product, that's when you have to step in and say, wait a minute, let's do research. Maybe we should look at other states like Massachusetts or New Jersey or Colorado and look at their testing requirements and what are their thresholds? What are their thresholds for heavy metals and all these things and pesticides? And let's create our own threshold and not accept product or buy products from cultivators that go past those thresholds because we don't want our customers getting sick. So there's lots of things. Product safety is very important. And yeah, I feel like we've come a long way, but we still have a ways to go in the industry. And I think this is the problem because it's federally illegal. We do not have a standard that goes completely across the United States. Like when we have food, we have the FDA, and everywhere follows the standards for the FDA. It's not like a bunch of states saying, we're just going to do this in Missouri and we're going to treat meat this way in Colorado and in California. This is how we're going to treat meat. And it's going to be completely different than Colorado and what they do in Missouri. We really need a standard across the United States, and this is the struggle, and this is why becoming federally legal could really support the industry in having these tools for operators so we don't have these challenges in different states with product safety. It's really important. A tip is to do quarterly mock inspections, and you want to use the same checklist that your regulators use. Now, this is the tricky part. Did your regulator leave a checklist? So when you first get open, typically you have your first inspection to get open and there is a checklist. So you can go back and you can use that checklist. You can also make your own checklist and you can always reach out to the regulating body and say, do you guys offer a checklist? I would say about half the states right now, they have a lot of good educational materials. Missouri's done a great job of providing all kinds of resources for operators there. They've done an excellent job, and so has Michigan and Oklahoma. On their website, they have done a really good job of creating all kinds of checklists and self-help documents. And I think what I really love what they did in Michigan is they created this really incredible best practices SOP for Michigan operators. So first I would check with your state's website and see what kind of resources. If you're in a new emerging market, let's say like in Minnesota, just wait for that regulatory body to get caught up. They'll start getting these resources up if they already don't have them. Or like in Texas, we're in the middle of the licensing round here in Texas. And then also, I think in the United States, the Virgin Islands, they're in the process of licensing. I believe the licensing portal is going to be closing here September 20th. And then the one in Texas is closing on September 15th. We have a very busy license application season happening right now. So just look for the resources and just get organized the best that you can. You could always go to the Michigan site and say, gosh, I really like that best practice SOP. I'm going to use that and then convert it over to my state, like Minnesota, for example. Or I'm going to use that in the Virgin Islands for my facility because I really like how it's laid out. So there's nothing wrong with taking from another state, but you're going to obviously have to convert it over to align with your rules and regulations. Number 5 of top 5 cannabis compliance challenges that can make or break your business. Number 5 is financial, tax, and banking compliance. I would say that the banking has improved a lot from where it was 16 years ago. I remember 16 years ago having duffel bags of cash running these dispensaries and just freaking out that we were going to get raided, held up at gunpoint with duffel bags of cash from these dispensaries. There weren't really a lot of rules and regulations like there are now. I remember having to spray money with Febreze so the bank didn't know. Couldn't smell the cannabis on the money. I'm not kidding. This is stuff that we were doing in 2009 and 2010 where it was really hard to get a bank and it was really hard to find banking in the early days. You don't have to spray your money with Febreze anymore because there are a slew of credit unions now that have cannabis banking, and they have set up these systems and they call them CRB programs. And all these credit unions put all their cannabis related businesses in these CRB programs that they've created. And they offer this specific support for this industry. And banks are used to banking high risk customers, if you think about it. Some high risk other businesses out there, pawn shops, guns, alcohol. Those are all high risk businesses, just like cannabis. So the banks are used to doing that. Unfortunately, the larger banking institutions are not really getting into the game right now, and it's just credit unions. And that's why, with the rescheduling or descheduling, that is going to support the bigger banks coming in and more funding and more capital. And you can do your research. There's a lot of information out there about it. So you can figure out which way you support. For me, I just want to support cannabis operators and I want the best outcome for everyone, including my own business. And so at the end of the day, I just want this industry to thrive and I want my clients to have access to money and to be treated like a real business. So those are the things that are really important to me. For everyone else has a different reason for what it means for them. But I would say because it's still federally illegal, this is where the challenges come in for operators. We know we have access to banking, but it's really just credit unions. And so part of the struggle is funding, getting large amounts of capital and funding and getting access to loans. They're still having to go through a lot of hurdles, operators, to get access to these loans. There are companies out there that are now supporting this, and they have these processes where you have to get audited and you get a score and all these things, and they can get you access to capital. But it's not as easy as it would be where, let's say, I wanted to open a coffee shop and I'm just going to go to Wells Fargo and apply for a loan and get a loan and walk out with the money in my pocket. That can't happen for a cannabis operator. It's not that easy. We also have the tax challenge. We have 280E and the 280E tax code. If you are new to this industry and you are thinking about opening your regulated business, I highly suggest you watch all the videos you can and listen to all the podcasts that you can that are out there about 280E tax code, because as a regulated business, you could potentially be taxed at a 70% tax rate because of 280E. And the other challenge with 280E is that you cannot write off the same things that a normal business can write off. You can only write off your cost of goods, and that is the challenge and where the restriction comes in. You can't take normal business deductions. Also, too, we're still a cash business, especially dispensaries. They're the ones that are dealing with the public, and the public's coming into their business. Dispensaries cannot take credit cards. It's still very much a cash business, or they have a little handheld machine where it's taking money out of your debit card, or there's an ATM machine. No credit cards. Visa came out and MasterCard came out a couple years ago and said absolutely not. They are shutting down all cannabis business accounts. As hemp operators, cannabis operators, they get their accounts shut down all the time. Payment processing is very challenging in the industry. So that's another challenge. I would say a good best practice is to partner with a cannabis friendly bank. There's lots of credit unions out there and banks now that you shouldn't be paying a high cost or high fee because you're cannabis anymore. Those fees have gone down. And if that bank is charging a high fee, then go research another bank. Having that relationship with that bank is going to be everything. So you want to partner with a real cannabis friendly bank or credit union whenever possible. Also, you want to work with a CPA. Without a doubt, do not hire a bookkeeper to do your 280E part. You really need a CPA. I really employ you to use a CPA to manage all your taxes and all your bookkeeping and making sure they understand 280 well. And you can use a bookkeeper if you want help with payroll or other things, depending. Some CPAs only will work with people on a monthly basis and they won't do quarterly, especially with dispensaries, because there's so much information to track every month. If you're a manufacturer or a cultivation, that CPA might potentially do quarterly instead of monthly. But dispensaries, there's just a lot of money moving through dispensaries. You have what you're selling, you have your taxes, and just a lot of money movement because of all the sales that are happening with the customers coming in. So definitely have a good CPA. And also, you want to create a strict cash handling procedures and processes like chain of custody, armored transport support, and how to reduce your risk. I would say a lot of times too, reach out to your bank. If you have a great relationship with your bank, a lot of times they'll have resources. Just say, hey, do you have any cash handling resources? Do you guys have any documents or PDFs or SOPs you can share with me where we can incorporate some of these SOPs into ours? What's your process for using the armored truck? Do you guys have anything in writing that we can use to incorporate into our processes so you can align with the bank, especially if they're picking up cash and picking up the money at your facility? So those are just some things to think about. Now, of course, I just listed 5 challenges today. There's way more than just 5 challenges, but we only have an hour or less to do an episode, so I had to keep it at 5. Hopefully this was helpful and that you got some really good information. And you can always reach out to me if you would like more information. Thanks again, everyone, for joining me today. You can find my podcast streaming on Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, and Pandora, as well as please go and check out my YouTube channel. That's been a lot of fun doing the YouTube channel. Please subscribe and follow me on YouTube, and we'll see you all next week.